concluded. Questions without notice. Are there any questions? The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Months before the election, the Prime Minister declared that under his government almost all families will be better off and that there would be a $275 cut in power prices. Can the Prime Minister name a single suburb in Australia where power prices have been reduced? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
The call to the Prime Minister. Order.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. I say, why is he incapable of asking a single positive question? I would have thought that after last week, I actually thought
Members on my left.
the outbreak of bipartisanship might have seen some change. But I know we're straight back in there, talking Australia down, pretending that the world is flat, and not worrying about a way forward. Having come in here and voted against energy price relief for every resident
Members on
in
my left,
every
there is far
suburb,
too much
he
noise.
has no credibility on this issue.
Order. It's far too much noise. I give the call to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the AUKUS agreement announced last week bolster Australia's security in the years to come?
The member for Page is warned. I'll remind the whole House when questions are asked they'll be heard in silence. It is highly disrespectful before a minister answers a question. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much. I thank the member for Hasluck for her question and for her interest in Australia's national security. Last week saw the announcement by myself, President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak in San Diego of the single biggest investment in Australia's defence capability in our history, strengthening Australia's national security and stability in our region, building a future made in Australia with record investments in skills, jobs and infrastructure, and delivering a superior defence capability into the future. But, Mr Speaker, we're not just investing in our capability, we're investing in our relationships. And I'll have more to say about the relationship with the Pacific and India that were also enhanced later on in question time today. The fact is that for the first time in 65 years, and only the second time in history, the United States has agreed to share its nuclear propulsion technology. This will be an Australian sovereign capability, built by Australians, commanded by the Royal Australian Navy and sustained by Australian workers in Australian shipyards. We will contribute to the peace, stability and prosperity of our region. And of course, Mr Speaker, we'll continue to adhere to our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Treaty of Rarotonga. And we've been talking throughout this period with the IAEA, making sure that those obligations are upheld. This will unlock a set of transformative opportunities for Australia, for jobs and skills and research and innovation, opportunities that will shape and strengthen and grow Australia's economy for decades, creating around 20,000 direct jobs for Australians: engineers, scientists, technicians, submariners, administrators and tradespeople. This will require a whole-of-nation effect, and that's why, working particularly with the WA and South Australian state governments, it will make an enormous difference. Training and skilling Australians. The scale, complexity and economic significance of this investment is akin to what happened when Curtin and Chifley created the Australian automotive industry in the post-war period. This will have a massive spin-off for Australian manufacturing and for the Australian economy. And I thank in particular the Defence Minister and his team for the extraordinary work that they have done in the lead-up to this announcement.
Give the order. Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Tomorrow marks 10 months since the 2022 election. Can the Prime Minister identify—
Order. Order. Members on my right. Members, the Deputy Leader will resume her seat. Members on my right, I cannot hear a word the Deputy Leader— The member for McNamara is warned. The Deputy Leader will be heard in absolute silence, otherwise people will be warned. I'll give her the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister, and tomorrow marks 10 months since the 2022 federal election. Can the Prime Minister identify a single Australian who is paying less on their electricity bill now than they were 10 months ago, a single mortgage holder who has seen their interest rate go down in the past 10 months, or a single person whose grocery bill is lower today than it was 10 months ago? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call. Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for her question, and I can confirm that tomorrow does represent 10 months since the election, because I remember it well. And in that 10 months, what we've been doing is economic reform, social reform, environmental reform, and making sure that we fulfil our first responsibility as a government, to make Australians safer by looking after our national security. I can confirm that not only have we been dealing with domestic issues such as ensuring that people had access to cheaper pharmaceuticals from January 1, cheaper childcare from July 1, that 180,000 Australians are benefiting from free TAFE, that we've introduced while addressing the skills shortages, that we've also been making sure that the mistakes—
The Prime Minister will pause. The question was around electricity prices, cost of living, families paying less for groceries. The Prime Minister is being relevant, but I'll hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, as you've just said, the question was about mortgage prices, grocery prices and lower electricity prices, and the Prime Minister has not mentioned either of those once.
Resume your seat. Order. When a question is broad, covering a whole range of topics, under the standing orders, the Prime Minister is being entirely in order, and I give him the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And it has been a good 10 months. It has been a good 10 months. Because what we've been doing is going through fulfilling the commitments that we made at the election. That as you go along the front row here, making sure we have a National Anti-Corruption Commission that will be up and running this year after the legislation being passed. Promised by those opposite way back in 2018, but not only not passed, legislation not even being introduced into this parliament. We had the Robo-Debt Royal Commission. The Robo-Debt Royal Commission exposing the tragic consequences of what happened with a scheme that was illegal. That won't occur on our watch. We've got significant reform right across the board under this government. I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her question. We haven't been able to get up all of the things that she would like and was advocating, such as I noticed just before a 90-second statement about live sheep exports. I was expecting something maybe from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to show how principled her stance was. But we'll continue to implement a Labor agenda, continue to take the government forward, unlike those opposite who just say what they're against and haven't come up with a single constructive idea in the last 10 months.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. And so will the member for Barker. Give the call to the member for Patterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Why is it important for Australia to acquire conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines through the AUKUS partnership?
Give the call to the Order. The member for Riverina. Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and acknowledge her deep commitment to defence. Last Monday's AUKUS announcement represents one of the most significant decisions that an Australian government has ever made. It is probably the single biggest leap in our military capability in our history, and Australia will become just the 7th country in the world to operate nuclear-powered submarines. Why Australia needs to operate long-range submarines can be seen from the most cursory glance at our geography. We have long trading routes which connect us to the world, and that trade has grown. In 1990, trade represented about 32% of our GDP. By 2020, it was 45% of our GDP. And just one practical example of what that means is that in the 1990s, where we had 8 oil refineries producing most of our petrol onshore, today with only 2 oil refineries, we import most of our petrol from overseas, and indeed we import most of it from just one country. And so Australia has always needed a long-range submarine capability, and the Collins-class has been and continues to be a highly effective capability. But even as we seek to evolve it and extend its life, the fact that every few days it is required to surface in order to recharge its batteries is an act which in the 2030s will become increasingly detectable. And that means that the capability will be increasingly diminished. And right there is why we need, in the future, a nuclear-powered submarine capability which can have submarines on task for months at a time. Now, obviously, this capability has the capacity to operate during a conflict, but its true intent is to provide for the peace and the stability of our region, because the defence of Australia doesn't really mean that much without the collective security of our region and the maintenance of the rules-based order upon which we increasingly depend. Now, over the last few months, and particularly over the last few weeks, we've been engaged in an intensive effort in explaining our strategic intent to our neighbours in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia. And since our announcement on Monday, I think their reaction demonstrates the genuine appreciation they have for the transparency that we have shown, but also an understanding of why Australia is making the decision that we are. Because at the end of the day, Australia's future nuclear-powered submarines represent our contribution to the peace and stability of our region and of the world.
Before I call the member for Calare, I just want to make some announcements to the House. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is His Excellency Vasyl Miroshnichenko, the Ambassador for Ukraine, and a delegation of deputies from the Parliament of Ukraine. I'd also like to welcome the Honourable Joe Hockey, former Treasurer and Member for North Sydney, and Richard Spencer, the 76th Secretary of the United States Navy. And I'm also pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Tyron Brumpet, the 2023 Australian of the Year. A warm welcome to you all. And give the call to the member for Calare.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In the recent bushfires around the Hill End area of New South Wales, homes and livelihoods have been devastated. When will a disaster declaration be announced, along with a full suite of badly needed support for residents and farmers, including fodder transport subsidies and the $75,000 special disaster grants? Bathurst RSL Club has kindly donated $19,000 for hay, but almost half is going into transport costs. Farmers need those special disaster grants on the double to help rebuild their lives and properties.
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Clare for his question, and I note that he went back to his local community during the last sitting week to assist in fighting the fires and to give his community the support that they needed at that time, and that was an absolutely correct priority. The biggest fire, Alpha Road Fire, burnt more than 18,000 hectares, and I can inform the member that a disaster recovery funding assistance declaration was made just this morning. What that does is that activates Category A and B assistance under the DRFA. And the support the member is referring to, primary producers' grants and freight and transport subsidies, would be activated by a request from the Premier, which he would make because of the New South Wales election being close. He would need to make in conjunction with the Leader of the Opposition in New South Wales, which we have not yet received that request. But as soon as we do, if we receive that request, we will prioritise it to ensure that people get the support they need as soon as possible. As the member knows, when there was flooding in his community, I travelled to that community and spent time with the member, with Premier Perrottet, the local state member there as well. The member, I think it was Orange, is his seat, and we provided significant support there. And when further representation was made by the member, we also, over specific funding, we also gave additional support there. Can I say, Mr Speaker, that as of this morning, there are still 34 bush and grass fires going across New South Wales, where 2 of those fires are yet to be contained. More than 500 personnel are currently undertaking firefighting efforts across New South Wales, and there are 21 aircraft deployed across the state. Across New South Wales, these fires are having a devastating impact. They come off the back of, as well, the significant flooding events that has occurred. Disaster recovery assistance is being made available when the request is made. That provides for freight subsidies for primary producers, and it provides for concessional loans of up to $130,000. But I thank the member for the work that he has done representing his local community, and I say to the member that if he keeps in touch as well with my office, we will do what needs to be done to defend that community, along with, of course, the Minister, Senator Watt.
Call to the honourable member for Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why is the AUKUS announcement important for the Australian economy?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Blair for his question, but also for the substantial amount of work that he does on behalf of his defence community in South East Queensland as well. As the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister have said today, Mr Speaker, AUKUS is a game changer when it comes to our national security, but it's also a game changer when it comes to our national economy. What was announced last week completely aligns with our broader economic plan, because it will broaden and deepen our industrial base, and it will deliver new jobs and new industries and new capabilities and new opportunities right around Australia. This will be a whole-of-nation effort, and it will create whole-of-nation opportunities, including around 20,000 direct, high-skilled, high-paid jobs, including technicians, engineers, scientists and project managers. It will deliver new expertise in science, engineering and cyber, and there will be critical investments right around Australia, but including, of course, and especially in the great states of South Australia and Western Australia as well. Now, this is all part of our broader agenda to revitalise Australian manufacturing, including through the National Reconstruction Fund and all of the other ways that we're investing in advanced manufacturing in particular, because we believe that manufacturing needs to have a bright future in this country and not just a proud history. These are exactly the kinds of jobs that we want for our people: high-wage, high-skill opportunities right around Australia. Now, Mr Speaker, Australians have already paid too hefty a price for a wasted decade of dysfunction and drift when it comes to not just defence procurement, but also the economy and manufacturing and industry more broadly as well. So we need to get cracking. We need to get cracking on investing in the future of defence, but also the future of our economy at the same time. Now, of the $9 billion we will invest in this program over the forwards, about $6 billion will be invested in Australian industry and the Australian workforce. This is a big investment, and we've been upfront with the Australian people about the substantial pressures on the budget. Defence is one of the 5 fastest-growing areas of spending in the budget, along with the NDIS, aged care, health care and the costs of servicing the Liberals' $1 trillion of debt as well. And that's why it's so important that we have offset over the forward estimates every cent of this new game-changing investment in our national security. This is a vital investment to keep Australia safe, to broaden our industrial base and to strengthen our economy at the same time, and it shows that we will always do what's in the best interests of Australians, their economy and their national security.
Call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Senex Energy has announced they will shelve a 120 petajoule per year investment in domestic gas supply because of the government's gas market legislation. Has the government received modelling to identify the impacts of reduced supply from this and other deferred projects on household and business gas prices?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. And, of course, the honourable member would be aware that just last week the Australian Energy Market Operator released the document on supply of gas opportunities, which outlined, Mr Speaker, the very task which has been inherited by this government, Mr Speaker, the very task which has been inherited by us and we've been dealing with. And we've been dealing with, including through the Energy Ministers' Council and the significant reforms that have been agreed unanimously between me and the State and Territory Ministers, Mr Speaker, to give AEMO more powers to ensure that underutilised storage capacity is better managed and to ensure that they have the access to all the information they require. Powers they did not have until this government negotiated it through the Energy Ministers' Council, and powers that are being implemented. And the honourable member refers to, I think he said legislation. He may not recall, Mr Speaker, that the gas cap that was legislated with no support from those opposite does not apply to new supply, Mr Speaker. It does not apply to new supply. Small fact, which escaped the honourable member when he was drafting the question in his office, working on it for hours. Maybe he remembered that, but it didn't suit his argument, Mr Speaker. Perhaps there was an inconvenient truth to the honourable member that he chose to ignore. Of course, he was against it. It was 4 higher power prices, 4 higher gas prices in December. He came in here and he voted for those higher prices. This side of the House voted for lower prices, Mr Speaker.
The member for Page is on a warning. Give the call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. What opportunities will there be for defence industry and the Australian workforce under the AUKUS agreement?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her passionate advocacy for South Australian jobs. The truth is, Mr Speaker, that AUKUS Pillar 1, the submarine policy, delivers 2 things for the Australian nation. One, it is the greatest capability enhancement to the Royal Australian Navy that this country has ever seen. And the second one is the development of a 4th shipyard across the United States, Australia, United Kingdom, capable of building nuclear-powered submarines. That is a critical part of this entire approach. There must be a 4th shipyard capable of building nuclear-powered submarines. And this is the greatest industrial undertaking this country has ever attempted. We'll be developing some of the most advanced manufacturing in the world. And as the Treasurer said, as a byproduct, we'll be creating 20,000 jobs, 20,000 well-paying, secure jobs, including 8,500 jobs building and sustaining the submarines themselves. Within that, 4,000 to 5,500 jobs building the submarines at the Adelaide shipyard, twice the amount that would have been built building the attack class previously. And this jobs figure doesn't even include the supply chain jobs that will inevitably come as well. And my message to the Australian people and Australian industry is this work starts right now. It starts right now. $6 billion has been allocated over the next 4 years to invest in industry and workforce, for the infrastructure upgrades, for skills development and apprenticeships, including a skills academy in Adelaide, training hundreds of apprentices each and every year, and capacity building of suppliers so that our Aussie companies can get a good shot of the work, not just for Australia, but for the United States and the United Kingdom. Work on the submarine construction yard starts right now. Training starts right now, and hundreds of Australian workers will be going overseas to work in the UK and US shipyards, developing skills and experience that will make a great contribution for our project. There's also opportunities in the supply chain. It's not a well-known fact that Pacific Marine Batteries already supply batteries from the member for Hindmarsh's electorate right now into the Astute class, and Talos at Rydalmere in Sydney provides sonar components. So Australian companies are already providing components, and when we have a fleet of over 17 submarines, there will be great opportunities. $30 billion will be allocated over the life of the project to invest in skills and industry uplift in Australia, because the truth is, Mr Speaker, this is the greatest industrial undertaking this country has made. It will modernise Australian manufacturing, it will lift up industry and employ 20,000 Australians in cutting-edge jobs that will provide a future for them and help safeguard the nation.
Before I call the member for Hume, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is His Excellency Tim Moore, the Ambassador of Ireland, and Simon Coveney, the Minister of Enterprise, Trade and Employment from the Parliament of Ireland, and I've also seen the Honourable Peter Stables, a former Minister and member for Jagga Jagga. A warm welcome to you all. I give the call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that this year more than half of mortgage holders in every state will move from a fixed rate to a variable rate, with Victoria hit the hardest at 61%? Doesn't this mean families will be hit with significantly higher repayments as a result of 9 consecutive rate rises on this government's watch?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his erasure of history there, and the fact that the interest rates, of course, started increasing while they were in office.
The member for Hume has asked his question.
This is what the Shadow Finance Minister had to say not a long time ago, in fact last week.
The member for McEwen.
We know the pressures that the international situation and supply chains are putting on inflation and subsequently interest rates. So in the other place, they've actually got an economic spokesperson who understands supply chains, apparently have an impact, and understands the international situation. But of course, that's consistent with what the Leader of the Opposition said in May. But it's a reality of a world. Nobody wants to see interest rates go up, but it's a reality of a world where there's inflation. And then the Shadow Minister himself, the Shadow Treasurer, said last September, it is very clear that the world has changed dramatically, even in the last few months. We've seen a rapid shift to an inflationary environment. Interest rates are bucking decades of downward trends. That's what he had to say. And he was right then, he's wrong now.
The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. Give the call to the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Personnel. What role will defence personnel play in the historic AUKUS agreement?
The member for Hume. The member for Hume. Order. Members on my right. The member for Hume will immediately withdraw that comment. The member for Hume will immediately withdraw that comment.
Withdraw.
And I'll hear from the member for Wannon before we move to the member for Swan.
I'd ask the Prime Minister to withdraw what he said as well. It was uncalled for, and it was uncalled for, and you should withdraw what you had to say. You said that you wanted decency in this place, then you should withdraw that, what you said, if you've got the decency to do so.
Resume your seat. Order. The House will... There's far too much noise as my starting point. I didn't hear. I heard what the member for Hume said. I didn't hear what the Prime Minister said. Did the Prime Minister say something unparliamentary?
No, I didn't, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, we'll move on. Order. Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
But I responded to an interjection from the Shadow Treasurer, but I'm happy to withdraw to assist the House.
Thank you. The member for Solomon is warned, and the member for Lyons will cease interjecting immediately. I want to hear from the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Personnel. What role will defence personnel play in the historic AUKUS agreement?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Swan for her question and her tireless work advocating for skills training, especially in Western Australia, and I urge her to keep that up, because there are going to be countless opportunities for Western Australians coming out of this great AUKUS announcement when it comes to maintenance, operations, sustainment and infrastructure build. And following on from that, of course,
Order.
I cannot emphasise enough just how fundamental our Defence Force personnel are to this AUKUS announcement that was made last week, because we know that it is our Defence Force personnel that are our most important capability. They are the ones that operate our great capabilities. They're the ones that keep our equipment moving, that are able to work in our national interest and to make sure that we have the edge. Because ultimately, it's not just about having the equipment, it's making sure that we've got the people that have the smarts to deliver the operation of that equipment in our national interest. And so, of course, as part of that, we need to grow our naval force, in particular our submariners. And that's why this week we launched our new naval recruitment campaign, Live a Story Worth Telling, making sure that Australians are aware of the great breadth of opportunity that is available by being a member of our Navy, whether it's supporting Australians at home, supporting our near neighbours in times of crisis or emergency, and of course working overseas in support of our national interest, whether it's above the sea or below it. But especially now with this great AUKUS announcement, we need to grow our submariner force. We need to grow that force from around 900 to over 3,500 by the 2050s to make sure that we've got the capability of people to go with this great new capability of nuclear-powered submarines. But of course it's not just about the number, it's about the skills that they will hold. And that's why we have submariners now that are doing training with the United States, doing training with the United Kingdom, and that's only going to grow. And I had the great opportunity this week of visiting the USS Asheville while it was in port in Western Australia and meeting its fantastic crew and learning from them about the training that they are undertaking and the training that our submariners will be undertaking as we grow our capability here at home, working with our friends in the United States and the United Kingdom, growing that capability within our Defence Force personnel, growing that sovereign capability here to operate our own submarines from the 2030s onwards. And that's why this is going to be such a game-changer for our country, for our Defence Force, for our submariners, and I encourage everyone to look at the great opportunities that exist in our Navy today.
Call to the member for Flinders.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Some 500,000 Victorian families and businesses will see their electricity bills rise from July. Yearly household bills will rise from $1,400 to over $1,800, and yearly small business bills will jump from $5,600 to over $7,300 a year. Why did the Prime Minister break his promise that energy prices would fall by $275? And why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. I do note that the energy regulator, Claire Savage, has actually released the information. A year ago there was an increase scheduled as well. But what happened was that there was a special regulation introduced by the then Minister for Energy to stop there being transparency, to stop the information being out there. That occurred. I'm asked with an interjection of why that would occur. And it occurred because an election was coming up, and those opposite, who were then the government, chose to hide from the Australian people what was occurring. And that's very different from what this government's approach has been, which is to be transparent, which is to acknowledge the issues that supply chains and that issues relating to the Russian invasion of Ukraine have had. And the Shadow Finance Minister acknowledged that on the 8th of March. Acknowledged that. But those opposite then come in here and then pretend that they didn't know anything about that. Well, here's what Claire Savage, the chair of the Australian Energy Regulator, had to say on the 15th of March. We have seen unprecedented volatility in our wholesale electricity markets over the last couple of years. We've had very high coal and gas prices as a result of the war in Ukraine and the recovery from the pandemic. We've also seen a number of outages, in particular our old coal plants, and of course we know that related to some of the natural disasters as well that were occurring. The fact is that the proposed increase to the default market offer is much, much lower than it would otherwise have been because of the government intervention. And here's what the Australian Energy Regulator had to say. Forward contract prices for 2023-24 have fallen substantially since governments began discussing possible interventions in gas and coal markets in October 2022. Now, they're the facts of the matter of what has occurred. The fact is also that when that intervention did occur to put a price cap on gas, and the New South Wales Liberal government intervened to put a price cap on coal, and the Queensland government regulated to put a price cap on coal, then what we had was that we voted for that, they voted against that. And then when we had $1.5 billion of energy price relief, we were for the energy price relief. They were for higher prices.
Give the call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How will AUKUS deliver jobs and infrastructure across regional Australia?
Give the call to the Honourable Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I thank very much the member for Bendigo for a question? There's a bit of rivalry between our two great cities, but as both residents of regional Australia, we both understand the role that the regions play in supporting our defence forces and the jobs and investments that can come with new defence procurement projects. Regions all across Australia are rightly very proud of the work that they do to support our nation's defence and our defence forces. Bushmasters made in Bendigo, tactical gear made in Townsville, small arms in Lithgow, munitions made in Mulwala and Maryborough. Regional Australia is, of course, doing its share in providing our soldiers, sailors and our aircrew with the materials that they need to keep our nation safe and secure. Of course, now with AUKUS, defence industries across Australia will have the opportunity to take part in the next generation of growth. This project will deliver the single biggest capability acquisition in our history, and it is one of the great industrial endeavours of our age. There will be an estimated $30 billion invested in Australia's industrial base over the next 30 years, supporting Australia's supply chains and building the skills and capabilities to deliver this project. We know that there are opportunities for South Australia, the home of the Australian nuclear-powered submarine construction, and in Western Australia, but investment will not just be confined to these states or to our cities. We know that our regions are set to benefit as well. By necessity, it will be a whole-of-nation effort, delivering significant uplift to businesses and industries right the way across the nation. It will flow on to benefits will be immense, with new skills, new capabilities, new technologies and new opportunities, and we are determined that our regions benefit from this as well. There will be opportunities for Australian industry to be part of a trilateral endeavour and support the supply chains across all three partners here in Australia, the United Kingdom and in the United States. It is a significantly unique opportunity for jobs and skills right the way around Australia, creating 20,000 direct jobs over the next 30 years. Right now, we know that there are kids in schools across Australia who will have a long career, a long productive career in defence industries, including young people from our regions, thanks to the investment that we are making in our nation's security. We estimate that at least $6 billion will be invested in the Australian industry and workforce. It's a rare national opportunity. I know that there are many businesses and industries across regional Australia that will be looking for an eye on this defence procurement. I am determined, as are all of the regional members, I am sure, in this place, that our regions will have the share of what is a huge project and a huge opportunity for manufacturing and industries across regional Australia.
I give the call to the honourable member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, it's 20 years since the invasion of Iraq on the basis of the preposterous lie that Saddam Hussein possessed an immense arsenal of weapons of mass destruction and was cooperating with al-Qaeda. Prime Minister, will you help prevent such unconscionable disasters in future by bringing Australia into line with countries like the US, the UK, France, Germany and the Netherlands, where declaring war is the prerogative of the Parliament, not the Prime Minister?
The call to the Prime Minister. Order.
I thank the member for Clark for his question and for his consistent advocacy on national security issues. And of course, he had a career as well in the intelligence community. Decisions about war and deployment of Australian forces are among the most serious that any government can make. And I've made clear my own view that parliamentarians should be given the chance to express their views following a cabinet decision to go to war. We have referred the issue to an inquiry now being conducted by the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade. And as the member for Clark says, there are different forms of determination around different parliaments around the world. There were 2 days of parliamentary debate that Bob Hawke allowed after his cabinet decided to join the first Gulf War. But he's right to say that 20 years on from the Iraq War, we can all reflect on the many tragedies of that conflict and its ongoing effects. Our thoughts are with the people of Iraq as well as the Iraqi community here in Australia, some of whom fled that conflict. Our thoughts are also with the men and women of the Australian Defence Force. They obey appropriately the instructions of the government of the day. And even though Labor opposed that intervention, Simon Crean, I think courageously, went and visited, farewelled the troops to make it very clear that he opposed the government decision, but he supported them, as we must always do in this parliament. I want to conclude by saying that I acknowledge the brave contribution and sacrifices that were made by the ADF and civilian personnel who conducted or supported operations in Iraq. We do remember as well those Australian service personnel who died and their families, and we all share our deepest sympathies with them who would still be feeling their loss.
And on indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just on indulgence, I want to support the words of the Prime Minister in regard to the support of our troops. There are decisions that governments make that aren't agreed with or are supported, depending on the circumstances in relation to committing troops to a conflict. Today, on the 20th anniversary, though, I want to pay respect to all of those men and women who wore the uniform of our country and represented us in our country's name at the direction of the government of the day. They were involved in combat operations in counterinsurgency and the training of Iraqi security forces of national reconstruction and humanitarian work. And today I think it's particularly appropriate that we remember the fallen. We remember Flight Lieutenant Paul Pardole. Paul was a dual citizen who served with both the Royal Australian Air Force and the Royal Air Force. In 2005, the RAF helicopter he was travelling in was attacked and crashed, killing all 10 on board. We also remember Trooper Matthew Millhouse. In 2004, Matthew's armoured vehicle was hit by an IED. Coming to after being knocked unconscious, he helped his injured mates. And as a result of that terrible incident, Matthew would later be diagnosed with early onset dementia, which cost him his life in 2015. We also remember David Nari. David was a member of the SAS who served on operations in East Timor, in Afghanistan, in his country's name. During 2005, there was a live fire training exercise in Kuwait while preparing for deployment to Iraq, and David was tragically killed after being accidentally hit by a vehicle. We also remember Private Jacob Kovko, part of a security detachment. He was protecting Australian officials at our embassy in Baghdad. Heartbreakingly, in 2006, he was killed after an accidental self-inflicted gunshot wound. We also remember Australia's casualty, our first casualty in Iraq. That was Jacob. We remembered Squadron Leader Gary Doakey. He was a chaplain of the Royal Australian Air Force, and he provided great support to those men and women around him. We remember all of those who today still suffer the scars, having returned from that conflict, and we recognise the fact that all of them fought in their country's name, at their country's direction, to keep us safe where we live here in Australia.
Give the call to the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How will the AUKUS Skills and Training Academy drive Australia's workforce and skills development?
Call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thanks, Speaker. Can I firstly thank the member for Wills for his question and his ongoing interest in national security. An historic announcement last week will result in this country having superior defence capability and ensure there is no defence gap. The acquisition, followed by the production of conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines, is a game-changer for our national security and a step change for our manufacturing sector. Speaker, of course, this is first and foremost a national security decision, but the economic benefits that flow from this decision are there for all to see. Thousands and thousands of jobs in South Australia and in Western Australia, and in fact across the nation, both direct and indirect jobs, starting with the construction phase at Osborne Shipyards in South Australia, HMAS Stirling in Western Australia, and of course going on to the production of submarines. As the Prime Minister said earlier, we're talking about occupations including tradespeople, highly skilled technicians, engineers, scientists, submariners, project managers and many, many more. Without the planned pipeline of skills to this very large and very long defence contract, this goal cannot be achieved, will not be achieved. The role, therefore, of tertiary sectors, both the vocational education and training and universities, is absolutely critical. Furthermore, and in response to the question asked by the member for Wills, key to this goal is a skills and training academy which will be a dedicated hub to educate and train our workforce and ensure continuous development of the skills of that workforce. It will be a whole-of-nation initiative with the central campus located in South Australia. And indeed, there are already some very fine examples that we can learn from, including the BAE Systems submarines in Barrow-in-Furness, Cumbria, England, and there are other very good models as well. Speaker, there is no doubt that given the scale of this endeavour, we will need to draw together industry, businesses and unions, universities and the vet sector, states and territory governments. For my part, I will engage with state and territory ministers through the Ministerial Council when we're negotiating the National Skills Agreement this year, because what we do require is a strategic approach to the investment in skills in this country, not just for AUKUS, but for the transformation of the energy sector and other areas that we confront in our economy. Speaker, this government does not underestimate the enormity of the challenge that we face, but will dedicate ourselves to getting this done in the national interest.
Call to the honourable member for Wright.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Under the default market offer, energy prices are to rise by $383 for South East Queenslanders. Why did the Prime Minister break his promise that energy prices would fall by $275? Why do Australians always pay more under Labor?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I say to the member for Wright, why did he vote against $1.5 billion of energy price relief?
Order.
Why did he do that?
Member for Groom.
Why did he do that is beyond my comprehension. It's also beyond my comprehension why he is determined to vote against the safeguard mechanism that was the former government's own mechanism put forward. How can they even vote against their own policy? They're so determined to vote no. But the energy regulator made it clear, her position, that the default market offer would have been much lower, to quote her, much lower than it would otherwise have been had that intervention not occurred. We do have an inflationary issue globally. It's a global issue. It's due to supply chains. It's due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's all, of course, in the aftermath of the global pandemic. But what the Secretary of Treasury had to say in evidence before Senate estimates was the energy price relief package will make a material difference to reducing cost of living pressures. That's what they had to say. Philip Lowe, the RBA governor, similarly referred to in his address to the Financial Review Business Summit on the 8th of March, again also referred to what was happening with high inflation. He said this: the high inflation that we are currently experiencing is one of the legacies of the pandemic and of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The pandemic interrupted the supply side of the global economy, and this pushed up costs and prices. And on top of this, the monetary and fiscal policy response to the pandemic has also pushed up costs and prices. There he was referring to, of course, the last budget of the former government in March, where considerable money was pumped into the economy. It all ended as soon as people voted in May, but that considerable increase also had an impact as well, not according to me, according to the RBA governor.
The call to the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How did the Prime Minister's recent trip to India work to strengthen the links between our two nations on trade, renewable energy, education and security?
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business is warned. It can't be clearer when people are asking questions. It's completely unacceptable. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lalor for her question and for her intense engagement with the Indian diaspora here, Australia's largest growing diaspora group, who are making an enormous contribution to Australia. India is a key strategic partner. It's a partner of some 1.4 billion people. And what that does is represent a growing, dynamic nation that is brimming with opportunity. We have a very rich friendship shared by common values that we have, common democratic values. Our cultural links as well are critical. And it was good to meet with Prime Minister Modi for the fourth time, and I look forward to welcoming him at the Quad Leaders Summit in a couple of months' time. This visit did advance our cultural, economic and security ties. We discussed the comprehensive economic cooperation agreement that we want to conclude by the end of this year. On cultural issues, I arrived on the day of Holi, a very important, colourful spectacle that takes place here in Australia, but particularly in India. I was able to pay tribute to Mahatma Gandhi at Rajghat and had that great honour given to me. We also took the Trade Minister, who showcased Australia's products there in India, including the wonderful food and wine that we have available here, and concluded an agreement between Australian film producers and Bollywood producers to bring more film production here. That means more jobs here. On the economy, we have a potential for massive growth. Over 25 CEOs and business leaders joined this troop. The CEO roundtable was an extraordinarily successful one, and an MOU was signed between the Business Council of Australia and the Confederation of Indian Industry. We also had 34 leaders from the renewable energy sector, again showing the cooperation that's there on renewable energy partnership, and the Minister for Resources was there as well about extending the Australia-India Critical Minerals Partnership as well. On education, we announced that Deakin University will be the first overseas university to establish a campus there in Gujarat. Wollongong University will be the second. This will make an enormous difference to us. On security, Australia will host Exercise Malabar for the first time this year, and I had the honour of touring INS Vikrant, the first aircraft carrier built in India. We have a great more to do to build this relationship. India will grow to be the third largest economy in the world in coming decades. This means opportunity for us if we get the relationship right, and I thank Prime Minister Modi for his extraordinary hospitality during my visit.
Give a call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. In a cost of living crisis, why can Labor's budget find more than $500 billion for Stage 3 tax cuts for billionaires and for nuclear submarines, but not for getting dental into Medicare, doubling rent assistance or raising income support above the poverty line?
Give a call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for his question. I think it is tremendously important that when it comes to the submarines and the AUKUS deal more broadly, that every cent of it over the forward estimates has been offset. And that, I think, is a tribute to the work of the Defence Minister and the Cabinet and others working with the bureaucracy to make sure that we can make this game-changing investment in our national security and our national economy without adding any extra dollars to the deficit or for the 4 deficits in the coming 4 years. I think that is really important. Now, obviously, when it comes to the broader priorities of the government, we are making big investments in healthcare. We are making big investments in skills. We have continued, including today, to make sure that when inflation is high as it is right now, that there is the indexation of payments and all of the rest of that as well. So I'm not pretending, Mr Speaker, that this isn't a big investment when it comes to the AUKUS deal. It is, but it's an important investment as well. And it's a fraction of what we spend in some of the other areas that we care deeply about, that we've made big investments over the life of the 10 months of this government and into the future as well. You'll see in the May budget, not only have we offset the costs of the AUKUS deal, but there will be new investments in some of the sorts of areas that the honourable member identified.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government strengthening defence ties with India as a key strategic partner in the region?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his commitment to the growing and vibrant Australian Indian community of which he represents so many people in this place. Last week, when the Prime Minister visited India, he went aboard INS Vikrant, an Indian aircraft carrier. I was very envious, a formidable capability, and it was an important symbol about the growing part that security plays in the Australian-Indian bilateral relationship. Australia and India have never been more strategically aligned. When I visited India last year, I had the opportunity to fly aboard an Indian Navy P-8 aircraft from Goa to New Delhi. And I did that to highlight 2 other flights which occurred last year in April and June, where an Indian P-8 flew from Goa to Darwin, and then an Australian P-8 flew the same journey in reverse. Both of these exercises built interoperability between our 2 defence forces. India and Australia in these exercises were using each other's facilities. But most importantly, in this cooperation, by allowing P-8s to fly from India to Australia, it greatly leveraged, almost doubling the capability, the effective capability of this reconnaissance and surveillance platform relative to having a P8 do a round trip from a single airport. It is a practical example of how we are looking for every opportunity to have our Defence Forces work more closely together, and this year we take the next step. Exercise Malabar began in 1992 as a bilateral naval exercise between India and the United States. Today, it's an exercise which involves India, the US, Australia and Japan. In its most recent iteration, Australia has been participating since 2020. Last year, we contributed an oiler, a frigate, a submarine and a P8 to this exercise, and this year we expect to make an even larger contribution. But as the Prime Minister said earlier, this year Exercise Malabar will be happening off the coast of Sydney because for the first time Australia will be hosting Exercise Malabar, and this represents an enormous leap forward in the defence relationship between Australia and India, because both of our countries understand that by having our two defence forces work more closely together, we can provide far better for the security of the Indian Ocean and of our region.
Give the call to the honourable member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. And as the Prime Minister would know, because he's always across these sorts of details, under the default market offer in New South Wales, energy prices are set to rise by a whopping $564 on an average bill in his home state of New South Wales. So I asked the Prime Minister, why did the Prime Minister break his promise that energy prices would fall by $275, and why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, which goes to what's going on in energy in New South Wales. Well, I'll tell you what.
The member for
I'm welcome to talk to not just my energy minister, but I have had a chat with the energy minister in New South Wales as well, and we came to a common position about what was required to go forward, not just with the energy minister, but the energy shadow minister as well. Perhaps if the leader of the opposition got through border control and into New South Wales, he could ask them a question. But I'd say to the member for Mitchell, who has such good relationships with the Liberal Party in New South Wales, that if he wants something passed on, just ask me and I'll get him the answer.
Order. Members on my right. There's far too much noise in the chamber. Order. I'd like to hear from the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. How will the Albanese Labor government's partnership with India create economic opportunities for Australians, particularly in the critical minerals and resources sector?
Give the call to the Minister for Resources.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Pearce for her excellent question. The member for Pearce represents so many Indian Australians in the North Metropolitan area of Western Australia, and I congratulate her on the excellent work she does with that community. Mr Speaker, India is one of Australia's most significant partners in the Indo-Pacific region. Geographically, we share the Indian Ocean, and geologically, we share a tectonic plate. But most importantly, we share a belief in democracy and democratic values, and our relationship is characterised by strong people-to-people links. This government's respect for those shared values and interests between our nations was demonstrated in the recent visit to India by the Prime Minister, on which the Trade Minister and I accompanied him. The Prime Minister led a very significant delegation of Australian business leaders to meet with their Indian counterparts, and the Trade Minister and I met with our relevant Indian ministers because, as well as our shared values, India represents an unmissable economic opportunity for Australia. India is set to become the world's most populous country this year, and in coming years it will become the world's third largest economy. While India is already Australia's sixth largest trading partner, we see enormous potential and economic opportunity for our two nations. The Albanese Labor government recognises the importance of critical minerals to net zero, and so too does the Indian government. In particular, India's ambitious goals of 50% renewables and 30% electric vehicles by 2030 provide an excellent opportunity for us to work together on the extraction and processing of critical minerals. This is an opportunity the government supports through the Australia-India Critical Minerals Investment Partnership, which I signed with India in 2022. It was indeed an absolute honour to meet Prime Minister Modi, the leader of the world's largest democracy, but I also enjoyed productive meetings with ministers in the Indian government to discuss critical minerals and the transition to net zero. That included meeting with the Minister for Power and New and Renewable Energy, Mr Singh, and my counterpart, the Honourable Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Coals and Mines, Shripalal Joshi. And so while in India, Minister Joshi and I announced that we had completed the first phase of the work under the Critical Minerals Investment Partnership between our two nations. Together, we have identified 5 projects, 2 lithium and 3 cobalt, on which the parties involved will proceed to sign non-disclosure agreements and begin undertaking detailed due diligence. Working together, Australia and India can and will reduce emissions, guarantee energy security and diversify global markets for critical minerals. Both Indian and Australian industry and workers are ready to reap the rewards. There is a massive economic opportunity for our resources sector. Like the Prime Minister, I join in thanking our Indian hosts for their enormous and wonderful hospitality on our recent visit.
Give a call to the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under the default market offer, energy prices are to rise by $485 on an average bill in South Australia. Why did the Prime Minister break his promise that energy prices would fall by $275? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. I particularly thank him as a South Australia member, because our intervention last December had an impact right across the national energy market, but it had its biggest impact in the honourable member's home state, Mr Speaker. The honourable member voted against.
Member for Herbert.
Voted against energy price relief because
the member for Deakin will cease interjecting.
I would like him to explain to his constituents that our intervention has seen forward prices in South Australia come down 48%, which is the biggest of any state, Mr Speaker, in the Commonwealth. And in fact, Mr Speaker, analysis from my department indicates that energy prices in South Australia in SAPN would have been $530 higher. $530 higher if it wasn't for the government's intervention. So that's what the honourable member opposite voted for, Mr Speaker. That's what the honourable member voted.
Members on my left.
$530 is what the honourable member opposite voted for. And as the Prime Minister indicated earlier, this is the default market offer. And the reason honourable members can debate this is because it's public, Mr Speaker. It's an essential starting point for this debate at question time, is that it's public for all to see. And under this government it always will be public. Under those opposite we're not quite so sure, because they have a track record. The member for Hume signed a regulation to keep the last DMO secret until after the election. The most cynical act this House has seen in a long time. The most cynical and pathetic act. But it gets worse. I say this about the honourable member for Hume.
The Minister will resume his seat. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Minister was trespassing well outside the terms of his question. If he doesn't have a clear answer on why energy prices aren't falling as they promised, he should sit down.
I'm just going to ask the Minister to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable member asked me about default market offer and energy prices, Mr Speaker, and I'm more than happy to talk about default market offers, because not only did the former minister keep it secret, it gets worse. He was asked, after he kept the last DMO secret, he was asked on the 29th of April last year on the Deb Knight radio show about rising power prices, which he knew about at that point, but he had not disclosed to the Australian people. He said, "There's fake news in what's being said about this, Mr Speaker." He called energy price rises fake news. He kept them secret, and then he misled the Australian people and denied that they were happening. That's what the former minister did.
Member for
and the
Fairfax.
former minister and all his colleagues, especially those from South Australia, voted for energy price rises that would have been $530 higher if it wasn't for this government's intervention. This government acting on the circumstances in which we found those price rises occurring, making them public, making them transparent, Mr Speaker, and dealing with them. Honourable members opposite prefer to keep them secret, to hide them, and not to disclose them to the Australian people, and then faced with a choice, faced with a vote, to vote for higher price rises.
Order. It's far too much noise. Member for Groom. You call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What are the benefits to Australia of a stronger partnership with India in education?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Holt for her question. The short answer is the benefits are huge, and they're not just financial, because international education doesn't just make us money, it makes us friends. When you come to Australia to study, you fall in love with our country, and you take that affection back with you when you go home. And in the world that we live in, that's important. It's a living bridge between our country and so many other countries all around the world. Before the pandemic, Mr Speaker, this is an industry that was worth $40 billion, but it was basically cut in half by the pandemic, and there is still a long way to go to get it back to where it was. On current forecasts, the total number of international students won't be back to pre-pandemic levels until the end of 2025. One country where students are coming back fast is India. The number of students coming here from India has jumped by 160% in just the last 12 months. And there is a big opportunity here to do more in Australia, but also more in India. Think about this. India is about to become the most populous country in the world. In India, there are 500 million people under the age of 23. There are 260 million kids at school, 10 million school teachers, and they've set themselves the ambitious target that by 2035, half of all young people in their 20s will be at their equivalent of TAFE or university. Now, if they pull this off, it'll mean that by the middle of next decade, 1 in 4 people around the world that get a university degree will get it in India. And they're asking for our help. That's why the agreement I signed in Delhi a couple of weeks ago to mutually recognise each other's uni degrees is so important. It's why the announcement the Prime Minister made a little over a week ago that Deakin University would be the first overseas university to set up a campus in India is so important. It's why what Wollongong University is doing next is important. But they're not the only universities doing this. 11 universities and peak groups signed agreements with Indian universities while we were there as well. It's Anzac Day in a couple of weeks, and in Greenway Park in Cherrybrook, in the member for Berowra's electorate, you'll find a memorial with the names of 12 Indian Australians on it, men who were born in India and who fought for Australia in World War I. 2 of them are buried in Belgium. In the last 100 years, our countries have changed an awful lot. Just imagine what these 12 men would think if they were with us today. I think they'd be proud of the country that we have become, the great multicultural country Australia's become. I think they'd be excited to see India become a real economic powerhouse in the making. And I think they'd be over the moon to see our 2 countries working so closely together to make the most of it.
Give the call to the member for Casey.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Herald Sun last week reported that Victorian families are now paying on average 25% more this year, in 2022, on groceries. The average Victorian household is now spending $185 a week on groceries, up from $148 last year. Does the Prime Minister stand by his claim before the election that Labor would deliver real, permanent, meaningful help with the cost of living? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give a call to the Prime Minister. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I have answered on a number of occasions today about the default market offer, and I've done that in the context of the fact that we have.
The member for Casey.
It's related to. I know this come as a shock. It's related to inflationary pressure in the economy that goes through supply chains, that goes through the price of energy, and it goes through, therefore, to having an impact on the cost of living. And that's why we have made measures to impact the cost of living. That's why we've introduced, and indeed is in place from January 1,
now warned,
the cheaper pharmaceuticals.
You'll be asked to leave the chamber.
That's why cheaper childcare is there from July 1. That's why 180,000 Australians are benefiting from fee-free TAFE. But the other thing that we're doing, of course, which makes an enormous difference, is wages are going up. Wages are going up. The
Prime Minister will pause, and the member for Casey, the Prime Minister was asked about cost of living. He's directly talking about families and wages. This cannot be a point of order regarding relevance. Give the call to the Prime Minister and he will remain relevant to the question.
Here's what the RBA Governor had to say. Wages growth is stronger than it was a few years ago, which is a welcome development. It is also positive that the rate of wages growth remains consistent with the inflation target, and that's important so it's not feeding into wage price inflation isn't occurring. So the RBA Governor has welcomed what we have done. He then went on to say, importantly, the monthly CPI indicator for January published last week provided support to the idea that headline inflation has peaked in Australia. Overall, we expect that inflation will trend lower this year and next. We understand that inflation has a disproportionate impact on those people who have less income. That's just a fact. But that's why we're addressing these issues. And what I don't understand is why those opposite oppose every one of the measures that are put forward to take pressure off cost of living.
Give the call to the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multiculturalism. How is the Albanese Labor government facilitating the return of international students to Australia?
Give the call to the Minister.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for the question. I know this is an area that he has a very keen interest in. His electorate, it's one that is very focused on the higher education sector. He knows, and we all know on this side of the House, that our Australian universities deliver world-class education to domestic students and also to international students. And we also know, as the Minister for Education just advised the House, how absolutely vital international education is. And that was demonstrated in the focus on international education in the very successful visits to India embarked upon by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Education in recent weeks. We also know that the international education sector bore a particularly heavy burden through the pandemic, and the lack of a plan for when borders reopened created massive uncertainty for our universities, for our TAFEs and for other education providers. Due to the lack of a plan, all of these providers, teaching and training, that next generation, building our capacities across so many sectors of our economy, were subject to enormous uncertainty because the migration system was in crisis. Almost 1 million visas in the backlog. Now, that was symptomatic of a migration system in disarray after nearly a decade of neglect. We have been getting on with the job of fixing that. The visa backlog is down. It's continuing to fall. And, Speaker, I'm very pleased to announce that in 2023 to date, we have had a record-breaking year for the student visa program, a record-breaking year. We are getting this back on track, meeting the challenge the Minister for Education was just telling the House about. I'm pleased to say that levels of interest in studying in Australia are even higher than pre-pandemic. We are restoring confidence in our visa system, ensuring that students who are looking not just to Australia but around the world can have confidence that if they apply to come here, they can get an answer quickly. So far this program year, more than 380,000 visas have been granted for students, 40% higher, Speaker, than in 2019-20, before the borders closed. This is because we are investing in our visa system, because we understand that we need people to want to come here, and we need to welcome people here. We don't need to tell students to go home, as the former government shamefully did. We need to recognise that there is still work to be done to repair the damage that was done. We know, though, that we are making a real difference. Student visas lodged outside Australia are now being turned around on average in 13 days. 13 days, Speaker, and 80% of applications in the department are now less than 2 months old. There is more to be done, but we're getting on with the work of restoring this vital sector in our national interest.
Give a call to the Prime Minister. Order.
Do you just deliberately stand up at the end each day?
Order.
I didn't even have a question. You didn't even have a question.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I have received a message from His Excellency the Governor-General notifying assent to the following bills.